It's 5:45 in the morning. Most of the neighborhood is still dark, but in one garage, a single light is on, and a guy in his late 30s is kneeling next to a motorcycle that, by every objective measure, ran perfectly fine yesterday. He's not fixing anything, he's swapping the exhaust. The new one cost him $1,200. It will make the bike about 3 horsepower stronger, and roughly nobody will ever notice the difference on the road. His wife thinks he has a problem. His brother thinks he's compensating for something. His coworkers stopped asking a long time ago because they don't speak the language. But to him, this isn't optional. This isn't even really about the exhaust. Because here's the thing nobody outside this world understands. What's happening in that garage at 5:45 in the morning has almost nothing to do with the motorcycle. It has everything to do with something much older, much deeper, and much more honest than most people are willing to look at. So today, we're going to look at it. Start with what makes a motorcycle different, because this matters. A car wraps around you, it protects you, you sit inside it like you're sitting inside a small living room. A motorcycle does the opposite. You sit on top of it, exposed, with nothing between you and the road but riding gear and reaction time. Every gust of wind, every change in temperature, every imperfection in the asphalt is something you feel directly in your body. That sounds like a downside. To riders, it's the entire point. Psychologists who study what's called embodied cognition have a phrase for this. They say, the brain doesn't just live inside the skull, it lives in the relationship between your body and the world around you. And almost nothing puts you in deeper conversation with that world than a motorcycle. 45 degrees of lean angle through a corner is not a thought. It's a full body, full nervous system event. So when somebody modifies a motorcycle, they're not just upgrading a vehicle. They're tuning the instrument they use to feel alive. The suspension, the throttle response, the exhaust note, the seat height, the handlebar position, every change rewires the conversation between the rider and the road. That's not a hobby. That's a relationship. Consumer psychology research, going back to the work of Russell Belk in the 1980s, has a concept called the extended self. The idea is that the things we own become a part of how we define ourselves. Your motorcycle isn't just a possession, it's a piece of you, parked in the garage. And here's the part that explains a lot. People don't build their extended self around who they currently are. They build it around who they're trying to become. A 26-year-old working a job he doesn't love, riding a Yamaha R6 with aftermarket rear sets and a full system exhaust, isn't pretending. He's projecting forward. The bike is a promise to himself, a version of his life where he's faster, sharper, freer than the world has given him room to be yet. A 48-year-old executive on a fully customized Harley Road King, with bags he chose, pipes he picked, paint he sat on hold with the shop for 6 weeks to get right, isn't having a midlife crisis. He's making a statement that took 25 years of grinding to be allowed to make. A guy on a fully kitted KTM 1390 adventure with crash bars and a long-range tank isn't planning to ride to the grocery store. He's preparing for the version of himself who finally takes 6 weeks off and disappears into Patagonia. Different bikes, different tribes, different aesthetics, same underlying psychology. The motorcycle is the future self, made physical, parked where you can see it every day. There's a guy named Marcus from outside Denver. Started riding at 20. He bought a Suzuki SV 650 used, and within 2 years he had rebuilt almost every part of it. New suspension, new exhaust, new bodywork, rewired the whole electrical system himself. Worked nights at a warehouse to pay for it. Somebody once asked him why he kept pouring money he didn't have into a bike that already ran, and his answer wasn't about horsepower. Marcus said his childhood was chaos. His parents fought constantly. They moved every couple of years. Nothing in his life felt stable for long enough to matter. But the bike didn't care about any of that. The bike held still. Every modification was a decision he got to make, on his own timeline, with nobody overruling him. The bike became the only place in his life where he was the only authority. That's a pattern that shows up over and over again in this community. The need for control. In a world where rent goes up and you can't stop it, where bosses make calls you have no input on, where the news every morning tells you the world is bigger and faster than any single person can hold, a motorcycle is one small kingdom where the rider is the only voice that matters. You decide the gearing. You decide the suspension preload. You decide the sound that comes out of the pipe at 6,000 RPM. Nobody overrides you. Nobody asks for a vote. That's not a small thing. For a lot of guys, it's a psychological lifeline. Roll up to any bike night on a Thursday in summer and you'll see something most outsiders completely miss. These aren't strangers parked next to each other. These are people who found each other. And here's what's wild. The motorcycle world is more tribally divided than almost any other vehicle culture. Sport bike guys and cruiser guys often barely speak the same language. ADV riders look at supermoto guys like they're from a different planet. Harley guys and Ducati guys can be in the same parking lot for 2 hours and never make eye contact. But within each tribe, the bond is intense. A guy who has spent $18,000 modifying a BMW R 1900 GS might look insane to his accountant. But pull up to an ADV rally in Colorado and he's not insane. He's respected. People walk over to look at his setup. They ask about his suspension, they share routes, they speak the same language he speaks. Tire pressures, fork oil weights, panniers, skid plates, fueling maps. Words that mean nothing to outsiders and everything to the people standing in that lot. The psychologist Abraham Maslow built a famous pyramid of human needs. Belonging sits near the bottom, right above food and safety. Not because it's small, because it's foundational. You can't build a life without it. And modern life has gotten weirdly bad at providing it. Churches emptier than they used to be. Friendships that mostly happen through screens. Work that doesn't feel like community anymore. So when somebody finds a tribe that gathers in person, that recognizes them, that values what they value, they hold onto it hard. That's what this is for a lot of riders. Not a hobby, a brotherhood, and, increasingly, a sisterhood. The fastest growing group of new riders in the United States, according to Motorcycle Industry Council data over the last several years, is women. The tribe is changing, but the function is the same. Now, here's where this gets uncomfortable, because everything we've talked about so far makes modifying motorcycles sound healthy. Self-expression, control, brotherhood, mastery, all real, all true. But not for everybody. There's a darker version of this story that the community doesn't love to talk about out loud. Some people don't modify motorcycles because they love motorcycles. They modify motorcycles because something else in their life feels broken. And the bike is the easiest place to spend the pain. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it compensatory consumption. The technical version is when a person feels inadequate in one area of life, they spend money on something else to make that feeling go quiet for a while. The simpler version is if you feel small at work, in your marriage, or in your own head, you can buy something loud enough to drown that feeling out. Researchers in the UK interviewed riders a few years ago and found a pattern that's hard to ignore. A meaningful number of them, somewhere in the conversation, mentioned feeling overlooked, underestimated, invisible at the office, not really respected at home. And the modifications they chose tracked with that. Louder pipes than the bike needed, bigger tires than the road called for, more aggressive ergonomics than they could comfortably ride for 2 hours. Bikes that demanded the attention they felt they weren't getting anywhere else in their life. That doesn't make the whole community shallow. Most riders aren't operating from that place. But if we're being honest, some are. And the hardest part is, the person doing it almost never knows it's what they're doing. The bike feels like passion. It might be something else underneath, wearing passion as a costume. Worth sitting with that question, quietly, for a second. Why this bike? Why right now? Why this much money? Because the answer matters more than the modification. Here's something that doesn't apply to almost any other hobby on Earth. Riding a motorcycle could kill you. Not in a hypothetical, abstract way, in a real, statistically measurable way. Per mile traveled, motorcycle fatality rates in the United States run roughly 25 to 30 times higher than passenger cars, depending on which year of NHTSA data you pull. Every rider knows this. Every rider chooses to ride anyway. That changes the psychology of everything we've been talking about. Modifying a motorcycle isn't like modifying a car. The stakes are different. Brakes that fade in the canyon could put you on the ground. A suspension that's set up wrong could send you wide on a corner. A tire choice could be the difference between scaring yourself and not riding home. Every modification is, on some level, a conversation with mortality. And here's what's weird about that. Most riders don't experience this as terrifying. They experience it as clarifying. There's a concept in psychology called mortality salience. When you're aware, even quietly, that life can end, the small stuff stops mattering as much. Office politics shrink. Weekend errands shrink. The argument from last Tuesday shrinks. What's in front of you right now gets sharper. A lot of riders describe the bike as the one place their head goes quiet. Not because they're not thinking, because they have to think about exactly one thing, completely, with no room for anything else. The tax bill, the difficult conversation with your dad, the thing your boss said in the meeting, none of that fits on a motorcycle at 60 miles an hour. There isn't bandwidth for it. That's not escapism. That's the closest some guys ever get to meditation. Most people who modify motorcycles seriously don't just hand a credit card to a shop. They learn. They watch hundreds of hours of videos. They burn themselves on hot exhaust headers. They strip bolts they shouldn't have stripped and figure out how to fix it. And slowly, over months and years, they become genuinely skilled at something complicated. There's a Hungarian psychologist with a name that nobody pronounces correctly the first time, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who described what happens to the brain when you're working on something hard but doable. He called it flow. Time disappears. You forget you're hungry. The voice in your head that usually narrates everything goes quiet. You're just doing the thing. Ask any rider who wrenches on their own bike, and they'll describe exactly that. Hours that felt like minutes. A focus they can't find anywhere else in their life. A quiet they don't get from anything else. There's a story about a father and son in Oregon who spent a full year together rebuilding a 1973 Honda CB 750. One year, the father said something afterward that hit a lot of people who heard it. He said those nights in the garage were the longest, deepest conversations he'd had with his son since the kid was 8 years old. Adjusting valves, cleaning carburetors, figuring out wiring that two previous owners had butchered. They talked about marriage, about fear, about things they'd never said before. The bike wasn't the point. The bike was the excuse to be in the same room long enough to get to the point. Some guys can't sit across a kitchen table and have a conversation about feelings, but they can hand each other a 10mm wrench and end up there anyway. That's not less real. In some ways, it's more. There's one more thing worth saying, because it explains a piece of this that confuses outsiders the most: the loudness, the aggression, the deliberate violation of polite expectations. A modified motorcycle is, on purpose, louder than it needs to be. More aggressive than the situation calls for, more visible than polite society would prefer, and that's not a side effect. That's the whole statement. Every society has rules about what's appropriate, what's expected, what's normal, and every healthy human being, somewhere inside them, has an urge to push back against at least some of that. To say, I see your rules, I'm not going to break them in any way that hurts anyone, but I'm not going to fully bow to them either. Motorcycles have always carried that. From the post-war GIs in the late 1940s who came home and didn't fit anywhere, to the cafe racer kids in 1960s London, to the modern weekend rider who works in a cubicle Monday through Friday and rolls out of his driveway Saturday morning on a bike that makes the windows rattle 3 houses down. Different generations, same gesture. I'm here. I'm not invisible. I refuse to fade into the gray. For a lot of guys, especially guys who feel like the rest of their week requires them to be small and quiet and agreeable, that gesture is the only honest thing they get to say all week. Remember the guy from the beginning, the one in his garage at 5:45 in the morning, swapping a $1,200 exhaust onto a bike that didn't need it. By every rational measure, what he's doing makes no sense. The math doesn't work, the time doesn't work, the bank account doesn't work. The risk profile of even riding the thing in the first place doesn't work. But people aren't rational. We never were. We're meaning-making creatures, and we'll spend whatever it costs to feel like we exist. That guy in the garage isn't wasting his Saturday. He's tuning the instrument he uses to feel alive. He's controlling one corner of a life that mostly controls him back. He's earning skill. He's earning his place in a tribe that sees him. He's making peace, on his own terms, with the fact that life is short and risky and worth showing up for. And quietly, without saying a word out loud, he's refusing to disappear. So the next time you hear a bike rolling down your street louder than it should be, more aggressive than the moment calls for, more present than polite would prefer, try not to roll your eyes too fast. There's a person behind those handlebars, with a story, with a need, with a version of themselves they're trying to build, one part at a time. That bike isn't just a bike. It's therapy, it's identity, it's brotherhood, it's mastery. It's a moving conversation with the fact of being alive. And honestly, when you put it that way, it's one of the more honest things a person can spend their money on.